Hello and welcome to this exploration of the perennial philosophy by Huston Smith. Huston Smith was a scholar of religion, and Gina Rose, our founder of the Chaplaincy Institute, befriended Huston Smith, and the Chaplaincy Institute actually gave him an award for his work at a uh, ceremony at Grace Cathedral in San Francisco. So that's just a little tidbit of information about our relationship with Huston Smith. I had lunch with him once. He was an amazing, warm, smart, and engaging and inspiring person. So he created one expression, what is called the perennial philosophy. There are other authors. Ken Wilber, the transpersonal psychologist, is well known for his perennial philosophy, but today we're exploring Huston Smith. Perennialism is known as the idea that there are universal or timeless truths. Just like in the world of plants, a perennial is a plant that exists over many years. And perennial philosophy expounds universal or timeless truths, especially related here to the understanding of transcendent reality or the divine. For the context of his perennial philosophy, I want to first introduce Huston Smith's understanding of modernity. Of course, that being the time within which we live. And according to Smith, if anything characterizes modernity, it's the loss of faith in transcendent, in a reality that encompasses but surpasses our quotidian affairs. Basically, the loss of recognition that there is something like the divine or spirit or a transcendent reality. And the idea here is that even while there are many people who are religious or spiritual, in our secular culture, that's usually seen as someone's private affair or the domain only of religions. It's not really recognized in a larger culture, Western culture in which we live, which is a secular culture. So the major institutions like higher education, science, law, the media, usually don't recognize a transcendent reality as part of the agreed upon truth of reality, but more like poetry or art, a subjective reality that is true for some people and can't be proven and should not be part of what we broadly recognize as reality. The modern world was reduced really to materialism or naturalism as the only really real. But, so Huston Smith says, our soul's longing is for more. And he believes, in fact, that there is more and that had been recognized before modernity throughout the centuries and millennia. And he wants to recapture that understanding and make a case for it. In fact, he says there is a transcendent dimension of reality. This book provides a map. So, general orientation, modernity is the time of the 16th to the 20th century. It is the time when science came about and shaped our view of the natural world. And there were a lot of benefits to science. The advances in medicine just being one example, the ability to heal, cure diseases that previously were devastating to humanity is an example of the positive aspects of modernity. Post-modernity, starting in the second half of the 20th century and into the 21st century, so where we are now, added a critique of modernity, namely that there really are no universal or no universal truths or large systems that explain everything. And it also added that we need to have an understanding of how our worlds are shaped by injustices and that we need to engage in a transformation of unjust systems to create a reality that is more socially just. And before modernity, and of course before postmodernity, the world was shaped by traditional worldviews, which, according to Huston Smith, provided a big picture, a metaphysics. And as we will see, he makes the argument, even though on the surface level, the different religions had differences in their worldviews, he believes that there was an underlying reality that was universally accepted. Huston Smith creates the metaphor of the tunnel of modernity. He believes that in modernity, and still in postmodernity now as well, we live like within a tunnel. And we have denied the huge vastness of the reality that exists outside of the tunnel, namely the world of transcendence, of spirit, of the divine. He says that the tunnel is the modern worldview of secularism, and it exists within the major modern institutions like the media, the law, higher education, and scientism. And we'll look at the distinction between science and scientism. And basically, he says these larger institutions of modernity recognize spirituality or religion only in a minor way, as sort of like a subjective preoccupation of some people. It's like poetry or art, which can serve a purpose for humanity, but that does not usually portray reliable truth about reality as it is. So Huston Smith wants to make the point that we live in this self-imposed restricted tunnel. And in this book, he wants to create a map that opens up the view again to the bright light and the part of reality that lives, that exists beyond the tunnel, which includes the transcendent world of spirit or the divine, which to Huston Smith is a real reality. Something that does exist, that only we have denied in modernity and postmodernity, but that was known to all cultures before. Further going with the context within which Huston Smith makes this case for perennial truth, he explores what the distinction between science and scientism. Huston Smith worked in large academic institutions, and it was part of his work to engage with scientists and make his case for his map of the world. And in these discussions with scientists, he made a distinction between science and scientism. And he highly valued science and real scientists who did this work of science, which, as he understands it, science proper establishes valid knowledge, proven facts about the natural world. So physics, biology, chemistry, as some of the major sciences, for example, use the scientific method, namely a controlled experiment, to distinguish between true and false hypotheses about the empirical world, and such contributes to the successes of technology and medicine. Like we have said, it is through modern science that we made huge advances in medicine and have learned to cure diseases that previously were devastating to humans. However, Huston Smith makes an argument against what he calls scientism. Scientism adds two principles to the ones we just explored. And the first one of that is that scientism holds that science, this method of experimental verification of hypotheses, is the only, or at least the most reliable method for getting at truth. And secondly, scientism holds that the things that science deals with, material entities, are the most fundamental things that exist and basically are the only things that exist. And the other realities beyond the material entities are really grounded in material reality. So mental reality, for example, the mind, does not exist other than created by the brain and its chemical and electrical processes. So these two principles, according to Huston Smith, are not proven scientifically. There are no scientific experiments that prove that science is the only way to get at truth, or that only material things exist. They are philosophical assumptions or opinions. The problem with scientism, according to Huston Smith, is that it embraces reductionism. It reduces everything to its supposed material foundation. Thoughts and feelings, for example, are reduced to chemical or electrical processes in the brain. Scientism denies the existence of transcendence or spirit in any way. At a minimum, it reduces the transcendent to a subjective, not really real or objective status. So now Huston Smith explores what he calls the traditional worldview that existed before modernity. And he looks at the multiple religions and traditions and traditional worldviews, and observes that all of them made a distinction between this world and another world, between immanence and transcendence, between what is immanently here and observable to us, or experiencable to us, and what is beyond, what is transcendent. And another observation that he made is that those traditional worldviews all made an observation that immanence, that this world, is infused with transcendence, which includes and transcends it. He makes the following subdivisions. Immanence, there are aspects of the immanent world that are visible and invisible. You might say that the furniture in this room, the computer screen that I'm looking at, are visible. But we generally agree that there are elements of the immanent world, even though they're invisible, are real. For example, the mental level of reality, the level of ideas, thoughts and feelings. We can't see thoughts and feelings, but we can still communicate. Even as you listen to me right now, I am speaking words which communicate mental ideas, which you are able to receive and recognize as real and existing, and you can, with your own mental apparatus, interpret them. So the immanent world has visible and invisible aspects. The transcendent world, according to these traditional worldviews, has knowable and ineffable aspects. There are parts of spirit that can be known and experienced, and yet generally the traditional worldviews agree that there is an ineffable part of transcendent reality, which is beyond our ability to grasp conceptually and really know fully. And another element of the traditional worldview, according to Huston Smith, is that there are levels of reality. He talks about an empowering hierarchy. And I think what he means by levels of reality will become clearer with this next slide. And the graphic that he describes here, this is from his book, The Forgotten Truth, where he makes the core argument that we're exploring here now as well. Namely that in these traditional worldviews, there was an underlying agreed upon understanding of the levels of reality and the levels of selfhood. He said, while on the surface levels, the major religion had real distinctions, he believed that there was a depth level at which they agreed. So let's take a look at the levels of selfhood at the bottom, as you can see, body, mind, soul, and spirit. Modernity and postmodernity agree with the traditional worldview that we all have a physical body, and this physical body is real, something easily recognizable to all of us. We can touch our bodies, we can feel it, we recognize it as real. The level of the mind, that's where it's already getting a little bit more tricky, because materialism would say that the mind is really only an epiphenomenon. It's really only produced by the physical brain. But the traditional worldviews would have seen it as its own level of reality, as really real, beyond even the physical material reality. So the mind is the level of thoughts and feelings. Like we just said, there is a level at which we can communicate mental ideas. And even though we can't see them, we recognize them, we can work with them, they are real to us, even as you're listening to me and my words. You recognize ideas that I communicate, and you can interpret them and make sense of them in your own mind. Beyond that, according to the traditional worldview, there were two more levels, the level of soul and the level of spirit. According to Huston Smith, the level of soul is a deeper aspect inside of ourselves that makes us who we are, and also that is that part inside of us that is connected to a reality which we will take a look at in a moment, namely the levels of reality. At the top, it relates to the level of reality where a personal god or goddess, a higher spirit that has a personality in the sense of a transcendent personhood is real. And there is a part of us, inside of us, that is connected to that personal god, goddess level of reality. And then finally, there's the level of spirit, which is the highest transcendent, ineffable level, the impersonal divine. So soul connects to the personal divine, spirit connects to the impersonal divine, to the formless, to the eternal, what Buddhists might call emptiness, what in Hinduism you might call the Nirguna Brahman. So that is the spirit within us, is the part of ourselves that is one with the formless transcendent reality. It's the Atman that is Brahman in spiritual teaching. Brahman is the transcendent reality of the formless, eternal spirit. And there is a spark of that inside each of us, which is the Atman, which could be called the large S self. which is the spiritual reality within us that is one with the formless Brahman. A traditional teaching in the traditional worldviews is the saying, as above, so below. So that is recognized here in this graphic by saying that the levels of reality are mirrored in the levels of selfhood. We just explored the levels of selfhood, body, mind, soul, and spirit, and they mirror the levels of reality, which we see on top, which starts with what he calls the terrestrial level. So that is material reality, the furniture, the trees, and what can be seen and picked up by our senses. Then there is a level which he calls the intermediate level. That is the level of mental reality, of what we just called the level of thoughts and feelings, even though not visible to us. They are easily agreed upon as being real, the level of ideas and thoughts and feelings. Huston Smith says that also, in traditional worldviews, includes the reality of spirits, which are sort of like disembodied beings, which were seen as real and recognized as real. Beyond that is the celestial level. That's the level of the personal god or goddess, the supreme person. And then beyond that is the level of the infinite, of the formless and impersonal divine. Now, Huston Smith's argument is that even though the different religions on the surface have different words or expressions for these realities, there's an underlying truth. I think we can all pretty much agree that the level of the terrestrial and the intermediate, the level of physical material reality, and the level of mental reality, thoughts and feelings is generally agreed upon. The celestial level, the level of the personal god or goddess. Of course, the different religions have different gods and goddesses. There is Allah in Islam. There is Yahweh in Judaism. There is the God of the Trinity in Christianity. And there are multiple gods and goddesses, of course, in Hinduism, Shiva, Vishnu, Kali, and so on. And so while on the surface level, they seem to talk about different gods or goddesses, according to Huston Smith, there is an underlying unity where there is a really real level of the personal supreme God, which is named then on the surface differently and expressed slightly differently in rituals or scriptures, but they're not really separate gods or goddesses. They are surface expressions of an underlying unity of a divine personhood. And then the infinite, the level of formless reality, Nirguna Brahman. In Hinduism, the level of the experienceable god or goddess would be Satguna Brahman. But Nirguna Brahman is the infinite, formless, impersonal divine, which is mirrored inside of us as Atman, which is Brahman. And again, there may be different expressions of that. Buddhism's nirvana or emptiness, it's not exactly the same as the Nirguna Brahman in Hinduism. But according to Huston Smith, there is an underlying unity at which they are indeed the same. In Christianity, this is not widely known because classical teaching really often only talks about the personal God, namely the Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Spirit. But in the mystics, in Meister Eckhart, for example, you have what he calls the God beyond God, which is this infinite formless God. And in Jewish mysticism, you have the Ein Sof, which is the formless, completely transcendent, eternal, infinite part of spirit. And the same in Sufism. There's an aspect of Allah as personal God, and there's an aspect of Allah as the transcendent, impersonal spirit or transcendent reality. So Huston Smith's argument is that while on the surface level, that religions have different expressions or experiences or understandings of these levels of reality and selfhood, at an underlying depth level, there is a unity. They are really real realities. And that could be for us, going back to our original intention of making a theoretical argument, why at Chi we believe that we can ordain interfaith ministers who can draw on multiple religions or even truths outside of religion. We can say, well, that is rooted in, at least in this one model, on the idea that the really real has an underlying unity. The underlying unity is a little different here than in Wayne Teasdale, where he says the underlying unity is really a mystical experience. Here, the argument, according to Huston Smith, is that there's an underlying ontology. It's a fancy word, a Greek word for an underlying reality. Ontology is the study of being or of reality. So the argument here is that these four levels of selfhood and these four levels of reality are really real. They exist on the ontological level. They're not just subjective realities. Here is his further development of this level, where he spells out the four levels of selfhood and the four levels of reality in a much more detailed graphic in his book, Why Religion Matters. So we'll leave it at that. Thank you so much for exploring Huston Smith's perennial philosophy with me.